I always knew there was something wrong with Isabel, my grandson's girlfriend. I saw the greed in her eyes, the way her smile never quite felt real. But for my grandson's happiness, I stayed silent. That silence cost me everything. When my life savings were stolen in a convenient robbery, she was the one who convinced my grandson, Leo, that I was the real criminal. He turned his back on me, leaving me with nothing. But what Isabel didn't know is that you can't cheat a historian. We know how to follow the evidence, and she had left behind a clue that would unravel her entire world. I'm about to take you on a journey of discovery. But first, let me know where you're joining me from in the comments. It's always amazing to see how far these stories reach. My story really begins not with hate, but with love. A love so fierce it became my greatest weakness. After my own son passed away far too young, his boy, Leo, became the center of my universe. I raised him from the age of 10. He wasn't just my grandson, he was the son of my heart, a second chance at motherhood. As a retired history professor, my life was quiet and academic, but Leo filled it with noise, laughter, and purpose. I watched him grow from a grief-stricken boy into a smart, ambitious young man, and every one of his achievements felt like my own. His only flaw was a heart that was perhaps too trusting. When he met Isabel, he fell for her completely. On the surface, she was perfect. She was beautiful, intelligent, and showered Leo with a kind of adoration that he had been missing in his life. But I saw things he didn't. I saw the way her eyes would scan my house, not with warmth, but with appraisal, as if she were cataloging my assets. I saw how her questions about my late husband's finances were a little too specific, a little too sharp. She played the part of the loving girlfriend flawlessly, but to me, her love felt like a performance. I tried to warn Leo, gently at first. "She seems a little focused on material things, doesn't she, sweetheart?" I'd ask. But he would just smile, blinded by her charm. "She's just ambitious, Grandma," he'd say. "She wants the best for us." For his sake, I tried to believe it. I welcomed her into our family, into my home, silencing the nagging voice in my head that told me I was inviting a viper to my table. The foundation of my world began to crack when Leo started his tech company. It was his dream, and I was so proud of him. But dreams are expensive. The first couple of years were a struggle. That's when Isabel's support began to show its true colors. She didn't offer encouragement. She offered solutions that always involved spending money they didn't have. "You need a flashier office to attract investors," she'd insist. "We need to host expensive dinners to network." Leo, desperate to succeed, listened to her. They were living a life funded by loans and credit cards, a beautiful house of cards that was getting shakier by the day. And I, the silent historian, watched from the sidelines, seeing a pattern of ruin I had read about in history books 100 times before. The day the house of cards began to fall, it fell hard. Leo came to my house, his face pale and drawn, the confident spark in his eyes completely gone. He looked like the lost little boy I had first met all those years ago. "It's over, Grandma," he said, his voice hollow as he sank into a chair at my kitchen table. "The final investor pulled out. The company's going to go bankrupt. I'm going to lose everything." He explained that he was on the verge of financial ruin. He had one last chance. A final, emergency investment of $300,000 was needed to secure a new contract that would save the company. "It's my only hope," he said, his voice cracking. "But I have nothing left. The banks have cut me off." I listened, my heart aching for him. This was the moment I had been saving for. After my husband passed, he had left me with a small but valuable collection of rare, historic coins. It was my nest egg, my retirement, my security. It was a tangible piece of the past that was meant to secure my future. But what was my future compared to my grandson's? I have it, Leo, I said quietly. He looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. I explained about the coin collection, its value, and how I had kept its proof of ownership documents locked away in a small, antique jewelry box. I will give it to you, I told him, my voice firm. I will invest in your dream. But we will do this the right way. We'll have my lawyer draw up a partnership agreement. I'll be a silent partner in your company. Tears streamed down Leo's face, but these were tears of relief. He hugged me tightly, thanking me over and over. "You're saving my life, Grandma," he whispered. For the first time in months, I felt a surge of hope. This was about more than just money. It was about showing my grandson what true unconditional support looked like. We agreed to meet at the lawyer's office on Friday to sign the final papers. The plan was set. Isabel, when she heard the news, was ecstatic. She hugged me, calling me their guardian angel. Her performance was flawless. She insisted on cooking me a celebration dinner on Thursday night, the night before the signing. "A toast to our new business partner," she'd said, her green eyes sparkling. I was still wary of her, but for Leo's sake, I agreed. The burglary, when it happened, was a masterpiece of subtlety. It wasn't a violent break-in. There was no shattered glass, no broken door. When I woke up on Friday morning, the day we were supposed to save Leo's company, everything seemed normal. It was only when I went to my study to get the jewelry box that I noticed something was wrong. The window was slightly ajar, a clean, professional cut in the glass right near the lock. My heart stopped. I rushed to the hidden compartment in my bookshelf where I kept the box. It was empty. I called the police, my hands shaking. They came, took statements, and dusted for fingerprints. But they were pessimistic. "It's a professional job," the lead detective told me. They knew exactly what they were looking for. No signs of forced entry. Nothing else in the house was touched. The one thing they found, lying on the rug near the window, was a single, strange-looking coin. It wasn't one of mine. It was small, silver, and had a foreign script I didn't recognize. The detective bagged it as evidence, but dismissed it as something the thief probably dropped from his own pocket. To me, it felt like the only solid thing left in my world. When I called Leo to tell him the devastating news, the line was silent for a long moment. Then, his voice came back, but it was cold, distant. "I'll be right there." And he hung up. He was coming, but I could already feel that the grandson I knew was gone. Leo arrived an hour later, but he didn't come alone. Isabel was with him, her arm linked through his, her face a perfect mask of sorrowful concern. The police had just left, and the silence in my house was heavy with loss. Before I could even speak to tell him what the police had said, Isabel started. "Oh, Eleanor, this is just terrible," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy as she looked around the room. "Are you sure you're all right? A shock like this, at your age?" Leo, however, didn't look at me with concern. He looked at me with a cold, searching suspicion. "Grandma," he said, his voice flat, "tell me exactly what happened." I recounted the story, my voice still trembling with shock. Waking up, finding the window ajar, the empty compartment. As I spoke, Isabel would occasionally sigh and shake her head, planting seeds of doubt. "It's so strange, isn't it?" she interjected, "that they only took the one thing that could save Leo's company. They didn't take your television or your silver." "What are you trying to say, Isabel?" I asked, my voice sharp. She immediately looked wounded. "Nothing. It's just, Leo's business was a big risk, wasn't it? You were always so cautious with money. It's understandable if you had second thoughts." That was when Leo turned on me, his eyes dark with an anguish I didn't yet understand. "Is that what happened, Grandma?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Did you have second thoughts? Did you decide my risky business wasn't worth your precious savings? I stared at him, my heart fracturing. Leo, how can you even ask that? I was robbed. My life's savings are gone. Were they? He shot back, his voice rising. Or did you just move them somewhere safe? Did you fake this whole thing because you couldn't bear to tell me no? The accusation hung in the air, so monstrous, so unthinkable, that I couldn't breathe. It was then I realized what was happening. This wasn't just a robbery. This was a character assassination. Isabel hadn't just taken the money. She had taken my grandson's love and twisted it into a weapon to use against me. Leo, sweetheart, listen to me, I pleaded, reaching for his arm. She is poisoning you against me. He pulled away, as if my touch had burned him. She's been by my side through everything, he yelled, while you just sat here judging my choices. She was right. She told me you'd never go through with it. She said you'd find a way to back out. I looked at Isabel, who was now crying softly into her hands, playing the part of the heartbroken peacemaker. Her performance was perfect. My broken, desperate grandson didn't stand a chance. He chose to believe the beautiful lie in front of him over a lifetime of my unwavering love. I can't look at you right now, he said, his voice thick with a pain that felt like my own. I needed you, and you abandoned me. He turned and walked out the door without looking back. Isabel gave me one last look over her shoulder. It was a look of cold, triumphant victory. Then she followed him, leaving me alone in the ruins of my life. The days that followed were a descent into a quiet hell. Leo wouldn't answer my calls. He had cut me out of his life completely. Without the proof of ownership, my assets were gone. My savings were gone. I was living on the fumes of my small pension. The final blow came a month later, when the landlord of my building, citing rising property taxes, raised my rent to a level I could no longer afford. I had lost my grandson, I had lost my savings, and now I was losing my home. I packed the memories of 40 years into a few cardboard boxes and moved into a small, government-subsidized apartment on the other side of town. It was a bleak, concrete box, a place for the forgotten. And there, on a cold, lumpy cot in a room that smelled of dust and loneliness, I finally hit rock bottom. I had lost my grandson, my savings, and my home. I was 75 years old, and I was utterly, completely alone.
It's a heavy story, I know. And I promise you the fight back is coming. If you're finding any part of Eleanor's journey relatable, or if you're rooting for her to get the justice she deserves, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps these stories reach others who might need to hear them. Your support means the world. Now, let's get back to how a single, forgotten coin changed everything. For a week, I let the grief consume me. I sat in that sterile, gray apartment and did nothing. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sounds of a life I no longer recognized. Distant sirens, the rumble of a bus, the arguments of strangers through the thin walls. Each sound was a reminder of how far I had fallen. My grandson, the center of my universe, now believed I was a monster. I had nothing left to live for, nothing left to fight for. Despair was a comfortable, heavy blanket, and I was ready to let it smother me. But one cold morning, as I was unpacking one of the few boxes I had brought with me, my fingers brushed against a familiar, worn, leather-bound book. It was my favorite history text from my teaching days. I opened it, and a small folded piece of paper fell out. It was a note my husband had written to me years ago. My dearest Eleanor, never forget, the smallest artifact can rewrite history. His words, from so long ago, were like a splash of icy water to my face. I had been acting like a victim, waiting for the world to save me.
But I wasn't just a heartbroken old woman. I was a historian. My entire life had been dedicated to digging through the past, to finding truth in forgotten details, to connecting clues that no one else could see. And the thieves, in their arrogance, had left a clue behind. I thought back to the day of the robbery. The police had been so dismissive of the single foreign coin they had found on my floor. To them, it was pocket change, a random piece of metal. But to a historian, nothing is random. I called the police department, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. I identified myself and asked about the evidence from the robbery. The detective was reluctant, but I was persistent. I told him I was a numismatist, a coin expert, and that the coin might be a crucial piece of my stolen collection. It was a small lie, but it worked. He agreed to let me see a photo of it. When the email arrived, I knew my husband's words had been a premonition. The coin wasn't just foreign. It was a very specific and, to a trained eye, a very telling artifact. It was a 17th century Spanish Merovindi, a common enough coin, but this one had a unique, tiny mint mark on it, a mark used by a specific mint in Seville for only a 2-year period. More importantly, it was the exact type of coin that often passed through a very niche and often shady network of dealers who specialized in treasures recovered from shipwrecks. My world, which had been gray and hopeless, suddenly lit up with a single clear path. This coin wasn't dropped by a common burglar. It was dropped by someone who dealt in the world of high-stakes historical artifacts. I spent the next 2 days at the public library, not grieving, but working. I was back in my element. I compiled a list of every rare coin dealer, auction house, and pawn shop within a 100-mile radius that had ever handled shipwreck artifacts. I cross-referenced their names with public records, looking for any connection, no matter how small, to Isabel. And then I found it. A man named Julian Croft, a private art dealer who had been sued twice for selling fraudulent antiques. And, according to a social media post from 3 years ago, he had been a guest at Isabel's art gallery opening. It was a thin thread, but it was a thread. I knew I couldn't approach him myself. I was an old woman with no power. But I had a secret weapon: my mind. Historians know that to understand the present, you must understand the past. I spent the next few days researching Julian Croft's entire life, his failed businesses, his expensive tastes, his known associates. I was no longer a victim. I was a researcher, gathering intelligence on my enemy. Isabel thought she had robbed a helpless old woman. She had no idea she had declared war on a historian. And we historians know better than anyone that the past always, eventually, comes back to haunt you. My research into Julian Croft painted a picture of a man just like Isabel. Slick, charming on the surface, but rotten with greed underneath. He moved in a world of high-stakes auctions and private sales, a world where valuable items could easily disappear and reappear with a new history. More importantly, I discovered his weakness. He was in deep financial trouble, owing money to a notoriously impatient and dangerous group of investors. He was a cornered animal, desperate and predictable. I had the players, but I still needed proof. I needed to connect Julian Croft not just to Isabel, but to my stolen coins. A direct confrontation was too risky. A police tip-off was useless without more evidence. I needed to get inside his world. So I used the one asset I had left: my knowledge. I created a fake email identity posing as Professor Alastair Finch, a wealthy, eccentric, and slightly senile collector from overseas, looking to privately sell a newly discovered collection of rare Roman artifacts. I knew from my research that this was Croft's area of specialty. I sent the email. baiting the hook with descriptions of artifacts so rare they would make a dealer like him salivate. For days, there was no reply. I started to lose hope. Then one evening, a response came. "Professor Finch," it read, "your collection sounds intriguing. I would be very interested in discussing an appraisal. When are you available?" The fish had taken the bait. Over a series of carefully crafted emails, I played the part of the forgetful but brilliant professor. I mentioned my failing memory, my distrust of official channels, and my desire for a quick, discreet sale. I was building a profile of a perfect target, a rich old man who was easy to cheat. Finally, I arranged a video call using an AI voice modulator to disguise my voice and a blurred background to hide my location. During the call, while discussing my Roman collection, I casually mentioned a recent unfortunate event. "I've had to increase my personal security," I sighed, as Professor Finch. "Did you hear about that dreadful robbery? An old history professor in the city, a woman, had her entire Spanish coin collection stolen. A terrible business. The thieves were clumsy, though. I heard they left one of their own coins behind." I watched Julian Croft on my screen. For a fraction of a second, his professional mask slipped. A flicker of pure, unadulterated panic flashed in his eyes before he smoothed it over with a look of polite concern. "How dreadful," he said, his voice perfectly calm. But I had seen it. He knew. Now I had to craft the trap. My goal wasn't to get Julian arrested by the police. That wouldn't prove Isabel's involvement. My goal was to make Isabel's own world turn on her. I knew from my research that the investors Julian owed money to were not the kind of people who involved the police. They were the kind of people who settled debts their own way. Using my Professor Finch persona, I sent one final email to Julian. I told him I was getting nervous about the security of my own collection after the recent robbery. "I've been told," I wrote, "that the stolen Spanish coins are being discreetly offered for sale, but the seller is a desperate amateur who is spooking the real buyers. It's making the market unstable." Then I laid the trap. My sources tell me the seller is a woman named Isabel, the girlfriend of the victim's own grandson. She's in over her head with gambling debts. What a fool! A collection like that requires a professional to sell, not some desperate girl. I then did one more thing. I found the names of Julian Croft's dangerous investors, and from an anonymous, untraceable email address, I sent them a simple, one-line message. "Julian Croft isn't paying you back because he's spending his time trying to sell a stolen coin collection owned by a woman named Isabel. You might want to ask her where your money is." I had lit two fuses, both leading to the same powder keg. One was leading Julian to believe Isabel was a liability who was going to get them both caught. The other was leading a group of very dangerous men directly to Isabel's door. I didn't need to prove anything to the police. I just needed to point the sharks in the direction of the blood in the water. All I had to do now was wait for the chaos to begin.
I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, my prepaid phone buzzed. It was a frantic, terrified call from a number I didn't recognize. "Grandma? It's me, Leo." His voice was choked with panic. "You have to help me. Something terrible has happened. There were these men. They came to our apartment looking for Isabel. They said she owed them money. A lot of money. They smashed everything. They said if she doesn't return what she stole, they'll be back for me." I listened, my heart a cold, steady stone in my chest. "What did she steal, Leo?" I asked, my voice calm. There was a pause, then a broken sob. "Coins," he whispered. "They were talking about a collection of rare coins. Grandma,
It was you, wasn't it? It was your collection. She did it. She did all of it. The truth had finally hit him, not through my words, but through the brutal reality of the world Isabel had dragged him into. "Where is Isabel now?" I asked. "She's gone," he said, his voice trembling. "She ran as soon as they left. She just ran." The chaos I had engineered was unfolding perfectly. The investors, believing Isabel had their money, had gone after her. Julian Croft, terrified that this amateur was exposing their crime, had likely cut her loose to save himself. Isabel was now a hunted woman, trapped between the criminals she had double-crossed. My revenge, however, wasn't complete. Isabel's exposure was only half of the equation. The other half was about truth and consequence. I told Leo to meet me at the office of a lawyer I had consulted, a young, sharp attorney who had been intrigued by my story. When Leo arrived, his face was a wreck of guilt and fear. I didn't say "I told you so." I just laid out the evidence I had gathered, the research on Julian Croft, the emails from Professor Finch, the proof of Isabel's gambling debts. I explained the trap I had set. He stared at me, a new kind of awe dawning in his eyes. He had seen me as a frail, emotional old woman. He was now seeing a strategist, a historian who had weaponized information to bring down her enemies. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," I said, "you make a choice. You can run, or you can help me end this." With Leo's full cooperation, we went to the police. This time, we had more than just a suspected robbery. We had a confession from a terrified co-conspirator, Leo, a trail of evidence leading to Julian Croft, and a motive for Isabel's crimes. The police, now taking the case seriously, put out a warrant for Isabel's arrest. They found her a week later hiding in a cheap motel 2 states away, with only a fraction of my coins left. Most of them she had already sold for pennies on the dollar to pay off her most immediate threats. The trial was a quiet, sad affair. Isabel, stripped of her charm and her lies, confessed to everything. Julian Croft, implicated by her testimony, was also arrested and charged with possession of stolen property and conspiracy. They were both sentenced to prison. Months later, I sat in the living room of my old house. I had used the recovered insurance money from the theft and a small, anonymous donation from a historian's private collection to buy it back from the bank. It was quiet, filled with the ghosts of a family that no longer existed in the same way. Leo sat across from me. He had lost his company, his home, and the woman he thought he loved. He was slowly, painfully rebuilding his life. He came to visit me every Sunday, not out of obligation, but out of a deep, humbling need for connection. Our relationship was not what it once was. The scar of his betrayal was too deep. But it was something new, something quieter and more honest. "I'm so sorry, Grandma," he said, for what felt like the 100th time. "I should have believed you." I looked at my grandson, the boy I had raised, now a man humbled by the harsh lessons of the world. "Belief is a choice, Leo," I said softly. "You chose wrong. All we can do now is choose better tomorrow." He nodded, a single tear rolling down his cheek. I had won. I had my home back, my name was cleared, and the people who wronged me were paying for their crimes. But sitting there, looking at the lingering pain in my grandson's eyes, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like history, something you study, something you learn from, and something you carry with you always. Thanks for listening. The past has a way of shaping our present, doesn't it? If you have a story about a lesson the past has taught you, feel free to share it in the comments. Your voice matters, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.